Okay, everyone, let's get started. It's 2 p.m. Singapore time on Friday, 28 August. And on behalf of the Sing Health Duke-NUS Global Health Institute, I'm delighted to welcome all of you to this webinar. Today's presentation is a continuation of our Global Health Seminar series, which we hold every last Friday of the month at 2 p.m. And the goal of this seminar series is to really engage our community in pertinent global health topics across different domains. And we really want to introduce a wide range of topics to you all. And I'm delighted to see all of you here, or at least virtually see all of you. And now that we can't do this face-to-face. The good thing of this format, though, is we have been getting a lot more people attending it. So I'm really hoping that you all kind of learn and enjoy this hour. I'm really very happy to share it with you and learn from our expert speaker of today. So today we have Dr. Salvatore Albani with us. Professor Albani is a professor with Duke-NUS Medical School. He's the director of the Translational Immunology Institute, as well as a senior clinical scientist with the Pediatrics Academic Clinical Program in Sing Health. Professor Albani's fundamental research interest is to understand how human immunity and apply that knowledge to therapeutic and diagnostic advancements. He has developed several innovative approaches in the area of induction and maintenance of immune tolerance in humans. He was responsible for the whole translational process from idea to conclusion of phase 2 clinical trials in autoimmune inflammatory diseases, and this has had a huge impact on society and on individuals. So it's really kind of been very, his work has been very applied. He's also the co-founder and charter member of the Childhood Arthritis and Rheumatology Research Alliance. He has co-founded the non-profit foundation Eureka Institute for Translational Medicine, and he serves as president of this international education and research organization, and you'll hear more about it today. Today he'll be talking about UCAN-A, the acronym, for Understanding Childhood Chronic Ailments Network in Asia. He set up this network to improve the clinical management of childhood ailments due to chronic diseases, and I'm really excited to hear about his work. Just before I hand over to him, as you may have seen, this webinar is being recorded. Please keep yourself on mute so there are no disturbances. And do please ask your questions in the chat box at any time during the presentation, but they will be addressed at the end of it. So with that, over to you, Salvo.
Thank you very much. I hope you all can hear me well. And I am delighted to be here, even though virtually. And I'm also particularly intrigued by the diversity of the people attending. So it is very important for me that I'm able to convey the message, not to teach anything, not at all, maybe to learn from you, but more specifically to try to create, as Amita was mentioning, an environment which is conducive to doing things together effectively. So what we're talking today is a network which we started. It's called UCAN-A. I'm a pediatrician. By the way, I didn't know I did so many things in my life. This introduction is very cool. This tape, it really inflates my ego. But among these things, we started talking about how we can be impactful in an area which is the very large area surrounding us in Singapore, where there are a lot of unmet needs, and do it in a way which could be a little bit different than usual. So this is the way how UCAN-A started. It's an acronym for a very big words which are understanding essentially diseases in children, particularly chronic diseases. And this is a network Asia-wide. But as you see from all the sponsors below here, it's really a worldwide effort. So what we're going to talk about today, given also the diversity of the audience, is to glide, first of all, on the concept of translational medicine and how these interfaces with the global health issues. Then I will describe the UCAN initiative. And then I want to give you an example on how technologies can help addressing unmet needs, a very specific example. And again, I will be mindful, first of all, of time, and also respectful of the diversity of the backgrounds So I apologize in advance if in some cases are too basic and in some other cases too boring, and I cannot do much about the boring. So first of all, let's try to get on the same page. This translational medicine is a very, very trendy word. Essentially, almost now you don't get a grant anymore, or publish a paper, or do anything which is considered meaningful if you're not translational. In reality, it is often an abused and misunderstood concept. In my opinion, translational medicine is inspired and stems from unmet medical needs. And these needs are the ones which carve a canyon between the patients and technologies. And technologies are supposed to bridge this gap. So it's not bench to bedside. It's not a kinase or antibody in search of a patient. It is not a clinical trial. It is knowing and understanding the diseases and their effect and consequences on patients, and knowing enough technology to address that. Why am I starting with this? Because I think we are living in a very interesting time where technologies are evolving so rapidly, and they are applied with not as desired efficiency as possible. Meaning, if you plot the speed of growth of technologies and the degree of application, in one case the scale is a log scale, is an exponential. Unfortunately, the improvement of technology into patient remains on a linear scale, is low. So the big question is, in a world which is certainly not unified and which is not homogeneous, where there are a lot of have-not, people who have not access even to basic clinical support, is the presence of technology, is the development of technology a tool which can speed up the closing of this gap here, or is it rather another factor which will give more to those ones who have a lot and even less to those ones who have nothing? And I would like this to be the conducive theme along these presentation. So let's go straight into UCAN. I'm Italian, so I have to always sprinkle some on Latin or other stuff. This means one from many in Latin, ex pluribus unum. And indeed, the objective is certainly not to get a fame or fortune, but to create a coordinated, high quality network where access to data, samples, and resources is transparent and is shared among all the levels of participants. And the objective is really to be transformational, so to be useful for society, and in particular for one part of society which we all love, our children, and one of the most vulnerable components of society. As I mentioned, we always start from unmet medical needs. In this specific case, let me share with you some which I think you will agree on. First of all, to deliver standard of care, it's a granted de facto life in privileged societies like here, Europe. But it is a dramatic unmet need just across the straits in a very, very large world. So a first need is to be able to reach as many underserved children as possible with a standardized level of care, which first of all leads to improvement clinically, but also provides a platform for summoning more. What is summoning more? What are other needs? First of all, whenever a traditional approach to medicine is that we, the doctors, are the gods. It's a very pyramidal approach. Patients and their families are quite passive. We dispense knowledge and wisdom. We barely listen. The same approach, unfortunately, applies also to research, where patients are often just suppliers of data and samples. They're not guiding the research. Yet, as a physician, I tell you that, and you know, that the most reliable information regarding clinical assessment comes from the patient, not from the doctor. This is not a paradox. And the most valuable piece of information in stratifying populations comes again from the patient. Knowing how a drug is working, a new therapy is working, if a trial is effective, is often the outcome of being able to ask the right questions, not only to listen. So passivity, overcome patient passivity is very important unmet need. Cultural fragmentation occurs at very many levels, not just within our society in terms of language and ethnicity. It comes within our realm, which is translational medicine, which is biomedical sciences, where very often we are not able to talk to each other and join the various components of the bridge, which again covers the gap between the unmet need and its solution, which means that we need to unite the clinic and research, biomedical research, which is more basic, and the clinical research into a continuum rather than keeping them in individualized boxes. And then when we go with further granularity in research, we are becoming better and better at creating and producing very large data sets and analyzing them like if they were isolated. Conversely, we need to develop approaches which are able to interface these large data sets with the clinical data sets and distill what is actually clinically and mechanistically relevant. So lots of unmet needs, which of course cannot be solved with one single approach. However, let me share you one way, which is UCAN-A. We are trying to contribute to some of the solutions. This is probably the most important slide. It will explain what UCAN-A is. First of all, it is, we can visualize it as a hub and spoke wheel model. We do need hubs. We start with Singapore, where a hub means is a place where there is technology, where there is the know-how, where there are resources, and where quality control can be granted. In an evolved version of UCAN, as I hope will happen in phase 2 and 3, then hopefully there will be more than one hub. So this is not an attempt to conquer the world. It's simply a pragmatic approach to leverage resources which are already effective. So Singapore essentially helps in the designing the structure of the network and in managing and facilitating its role and action. It is also the place where data and samples are collected and then distributed to the ones who need them. The first spot here, the first step, is to identify underserved areas and unmet needs. And we cannot be too broad when you start summoning. You need to be focused on a first pragmatic, achievable milestone. And I will explain later what the underserved areas and what the unmet needs were identified for the first step. This is a general slide on the general approach. Once we have identified areas and fields, we will define standard operating procedures for diagnosis and treatment. We will agree on ways also to reach out communities which are often outside of the reach of individual local entities, and we will share with SOPs, with physicians and research nurses who are local, where local means they belong to the underserved areas. And we embed these in a local health structure, typically a hospital or university, wherever there is, or a clinic. This team will be provided with the resources to deliver state-of-the-art care based on a standard operating procedure, which is the same network-wide. And underscore, this is very important, to guarantee a delivery of care which is standardized, but also to obtain back high-quality data and samples which are standardized, so that we can compare the effectiveness of intervention in Jakarta or in Dubai or in wherever you want, because we do the same things the same way. Similarly, we will create a standardized interface, and that is a very important part and probably one of the elements of novelty, because many networks try to provide care in places where there isn't. Here, however, what we do is to put the patient and their family at the center of the entire enterprise. So we will provide them with access to a digital tool, let it be an app or a website, it doesn't really matter, where they will be able to, where patients will be able to provide in real time input on how they feel, what they need, what kind of support can be given to them. So there will be resources, and there will be also a direct interface with the team which locally is taking care of them. Please be mindful that these patients may be many hours of travel away from the clinic. They may be in a remote urban area or in a jungle or in a beach far away. And yet this will enable them to create an interface. So per se, this is very important as a forward step toward a better care. But it's also an important window to collect de-identified data on outcomes, on the effects which this sort of standardized approach has on populations of patients who had nothing, who were completely not even taken care of. And we will be able so to draw comparators to take data which may be precious when replicated and validated on a global scale in the context of delivering of global health. Together with the data flow, there will be a sample flow whenever the patients come to follow up. We'll be collecting using the same standardized procedures, samples, typically blood samples in most cases, which can then be shipped to the hub, Singapore in this case, and properly stored and studied. So that is the idea. It's essentially a convergence of an attempt to provide state-of-art standardized care with the philosophy of putting the patient at the center of the initiative, with the objective to make this effort translationally meaningful. So to go beyond having provided care, beyond having motivated the patients in being protagonists of their own health, and using in a positive way the data flow to create new possibilities for therapies and better treatment. So for phase one, we decided to be pragmatic. My background is rheumatology. Actually, I'm a pediatric rheumatologist clinically, and I have a very good network worldwide accordingly. So there is some sort of credibility, not mine, but the effort, which can be lent if we pick the pediatric rheumatology diseases. However, I'm perfectly aware that these are diseases of the privileged, meaning it is rare to be able to diagnose in a setting which is not secondary or tertiary care, diseases of this sort, which often get undiagnosed. But also we need to be mindful that in areas outside of Singapore, rheumatology diseases have a lesser relevance than diseases where the burden is much higher and frequent. And we pick the rheumatic fever, again, to strike the balance between our own knowledge and credibility, which is in immunology area, with a broadly represented and dramatically grave disease, such as rheumatic fever in children. This way, with this approach, we think we are pragmatic. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. It's easier to identify standard operating procedures to agree on, and we have also the technologies to provide an analysis of data and samples. This makes the whole in first step more feasible. And in fact, we have already started working on this, and we had a consensus conference. I believe it is very important to have consensus from the foundation. The success for an ambitious idea stems from having the entire team dreaming together about it and contributing. So we did not impose any procedures in a colonial type approach, but rather than the opposite, we asked specifically what the individual physicians whom we invited wanted and were comfortable with. We are now in the process, so we have identified the initial site which will be Yogyakarta in Indonesia, which covers a broad area which is both metropolitan and rural, and where there are dramatic unmet needs, where there is, however, a structure which can be the pivot for the initiative, and where there are physicians ready to work with. We had some significant slowdowns related to our ability to design and provide the digital tool. Is not solved yet, but with everybody goodwill and contribution, we will soon have this tool to provide to the patient. This tool is, as I mentioned, a digital app designed to encompass most of the questions and problems and needs which diseases in the area of rheumatology and rheumatic fever have, and provide so with the patients and their family with an easy to work with platform to look for resources, but also to tell the physicians how they are doing, how effective intervention is, what kind of additional needs are need to be solved. So once this is available, we will be able to start. And the idea is to recruit within a confined period of time, it's about a year, 100 patients to be enrolled in this initiative and to be followed for a certain amount of time, so that we will be able to collect sufficient data on the efficiency of the intervention and on the outcome. And again, there will be a wealth of clinical data, outcome data, global health data, because this intervention is obviously nested in the territory where it occurs. And we also will get high quality samples to be employed. And I will give you an example on how we think. So if phase 1 works, we'll have demonstrated the concept, of course, but we already have a platform which is powerful, which can be cloned and extended to provide standardized clinical care and effective translational research in areas which are geographically, ethnically, and financially diverse and very distant one from the other. All these harmonized process essentially will translate in creating a network which potentially has no equals, because it again goes on a case-by-case basis in a very ad hoc, controlled, very well thought upon approach, where each of the disease areas will be tackled, will be approached using technologies and therapies and diagnosis which are homogeneous. And again, I keep reiterating the concept of high quality and homogeneous is the only way to address questions which relate also to rare diseases, where clinical research and translation research is very difficult because there aren't enough patients in any individual place. But if we have a network of this kind, which can guarantee quality across the board, then we will be able also to answer very difficult questions where the patient's number is a limitation. A network of this kind is obviously attractive to many entities, and I will elaborate on this later. We envision at least 2 other phases. After the phase 1, where again we have demonstrated the concept and we already will have sample and data to analyze, we plan to expand the network in 2 dimensions. One is geographic in phase 2, where we will involve other centers. We are thinking big geographically, and we're looking also for partners. So Japan, Australia, and the Emirates are possible other candidate hubs to reach as far away as Sudan, Ethiopia, and Egypt. Of course, the Aboriginal population in Australia for rheumatic fever, and the immense universe around us, Indonesia, China, and any other country around. So we will essentially clone the same approach with the same focus and extend the network. This has immediate relevance for making this network self-sustained. Children, improving children's health and developing new approaches for therapy is obviously attractive to governments and to philanthropic organizations. This is a message which should be able to resonate immediately and make this approach self-sustainable. In phase 3, if everything goes well, we will extend the disease areas to other areas of relevance, including, of course, infectious diseases, including of which rheumatic fever is partly a component, but also other problems like cancer or allergy. But we need to go step by step, prudently, manage the resources, and make sure that each next step starts from a solid foundation. So the deliverables which we can envision already kind of glided through the previous slides. The first and most important opportunity, of course, that we will change lives, as many as we can, but we will provide state-of-the-art treatment to patients who had nothing. We will also create a platform which is an important provider of data, an important substrate for research in global health. And particularly so, once again, because it is homogeneous and quality controlled, but also because it will pair outcomes of the intervention clinically with social outcomes, with mechanistic outcomes, as insofar we get also the samples. This combination is per se very attractive, as I mentioned already, even to industry, to identify new targets for therapy, or even to test their own new therapies in a network which can finally guarantee sufficient numbers at high quality. And I would like also to emphasize that this sort of approach is also an important educational approach in my point of view, because it provides an opportunity to learn and contribute firsthand to the interfacing between first and last word, and how we can again contribute in closing the gaps. So there are many opportunities to learn at any level for anybody who's interested in being involved. And we believe that this approach is transformational for the reasons which I just outlined. So the meaning of transformation for me is that the effort will be impactful insofar as it will affect many lives of different type, starting, as I said, from provisional care to the underserved, education of patients and their family, effective medical care. It stems from a convergence of knowledge and trust. It's not the deliveries from top to bottom of antibiotics. To win poverty, you'll teach people to drill a well and get water forever. You don't bring them jugs of water once. So that is the same approach, to create an environment in each of the peripheral places which is conducive to interfacing patients and their caretakers. It is important that this approach is self-sustainable. UCAN has been funded with a generous donation from an anonymous donor to KK, and I am extremely respectful for this funding, which I see as an investment. So we need to work very hard to make sure that the investment is has a high ROI, not just in terms of delivering these milestones, but most importantly to create a future. So this is UCAN, as you obviously, as obviously was evident, we are at the initial stages. Yet I would like to spend the last 5 to 10 minutes max, so don't worry, we are soon to be done, to address what I started with. The question of whether technology reduces or broadens the gap in global health. And I want to give you an example specifically related to UCAN. Let's focus on rheumatology diseases, but in particular, say rheumatic fever. Rheumatic fever, as you know, is consists in an infectious disease and in an abnormal immune reaction to the etiological agent, which leads essentially to the equivalent of an autoimmune reaction and disease. So infection and immunity are significantly interlaced here. So the question is, which may already be in your minds, why do we need to study rheumatic fever? We know that antibiotic treatment may significantly and effectively reduce the complications which arise later. This is true, but only partially. And also, it is somewhat very simplistic. It does not solve the problem. As a matter of fact, even well-developed nations like Australia have this problem. So the way UCAN could help is in studying much more in depth the immune system of the patients and address two important goals. Predict the clinical fate. Which patients will develop certain types of complications? Which patients will be more refractory to therapy? And then specifically through this understanding, how we can identify new therapeutic targets beyond just the antibiotics by interfering directly on the immune system. So now I don't want to be too heavy on immunology. I will show you some data, some approaches, and I will not go into the depth of it. The important thing here is to show how state-of-art research can directly interface with state-of-art clinical intervention and produce direct benefits. So allow me to give you some examples. In this context, which is again understanding the immune system as a whole, in order to understand the disease, we have developed an atlas of the healthy human immunome, starting from feti all the way to 90-year-old plus. What does it mean? It is the equivalent in cartoonish terms of collecting a whole bunch of X-rays or MRIs and and depict how the normal is. How is a normal skeleton? How is a normal set of organs? How do they look like? And from this knowledge, which per se can be dissected to understand the healthy, we overlay the image of disease. We look at diseases as perturbations of the architecture of the normal immune system. And we can do this by, again, overlaying what is healthy with what is diseased. This leads to a very powerful approach, which integrate, as I mentioned before, very complicated large data sets with the most important part of what we are talking about, which is the patients. So in the context of UCAN, we have the patients providing data related to the clinical outcome. We have the patients who benefit from the interventions, but also we have patients who are providing the samples, which will be studied, which will be dissected to distill what is important for them. And this knowledge will help in improving therapy by stratifying, for instance, population of patients susceptible or more to certain therapy, but also to develop novel therapies. Just to visualize, don't worry too much about the immunology. And this is the way our atlas looks like. These are age, so going from sub-zero, because we have feti, to adult and senior. And these all peaks are different types of cells, of different kind. And the higher the peak, the more of those cells are. And as you can see, just visually, you can see how these type of cells change with time. It's completely normal. You can dissect this data set. For instance, you can pick patients who are, or better, people who are 9-year-old, which is a typical age for rheumatic fever. And these are normal. You can really look at the individual immune cell functions. And then you can overlay, as I said, with rheumatic fever kids from UCAN, and you can distill what is important. If you want to visualize this as a whole, the architecture of the immunome, it looks again like X-ray of a body at MRI. It shows in normal, these are normals, and a complex set of relations which are functional, which in diseases that say arthritis, in this case, this is an example, are completely different. You see how even visually the two networks differ. One is balanced and homogeneous, the other one is polarized toward, in this case, generating inflammation. And what is important is that this approach can predict clinical fate. To give you an example, and then just an example, by applying our tool to patients with arthritis who are responding to a drug, so they're doing well, and they come to me, the physician, and ask, can I withdraw from this drug? There is no way to predict it so far until this approach came. And if you look at the immune system as a whole, or patients who will flare if we take the drug away, we see that this system you see here is, I hope you can see my cursor, is very different than the system of patients with the same disease who have no symptoms as the others and who will not relapse if we take the drug away. So these are predictors. And in the case of UCAN, we could help identifying patients with a better clinical fate versus others. We can also separate. I'll go a little bit faster because I don't want to overwhelm you with immunology. But we can separate, for instance, normal to disease. This is another disease which will be part of UCAN, is lupus. And here we overlay the normal children with the children with lupus. And you can see already in color the differences. And then if we go within the patients with lupus, we can really look at cell subsets which associate with the disease being active versus inactive. Again, this will directly apply to samples coming from UCAN, but it's particularly important because it will help shaping the way we treat the patients, and we can predict the way they will respond to therapy. So I believe that this is an integration between state-of-art clinical approaches, quality control in a homogeneous setting, putting the patient at the center of the entire network or the entire activities, and interlacing all of these with the high quality clinical research and translational research. So this is a teamwork. The team is very large, is ever expanding. I actually hope that some of you will come and step out and say, can I help? We are at the initial stages, which are exciting and frustrating to a certain point. So I'm done. I want to thank you. And I want to remind our motto, which is the reason why I came to Singapore. And I'm very happy to work together with all of you. Thank you for your attention. Hopefully I didn't bore you to that.
Salvo, that was fascinating. Thank you very much. And to the participants, please, if you have any questions, do put them in the chat box. But while people maybe are thinking of their questions, I actually had a number of questions on some of the specifics of the study. But before we get to those questions, I thought I'll ask you the very burning, broad question that is maybe on everyone's mind nowadays. How has your work been impacted by the whole COVID-19 situation? One way, maybe, how have you been able to, cope with anything that's happening, especially in your many field sites? And then also, because your work is so kind of, in a sense, related to some of the new things that they're trying to find out about COVID, are there any, overlaps and, can you comment on that?
Well, the short answer is yes. The tool I outlined, the one called EPIC, is very, very powerful, specifically to address two questions with COVID. As a matter of fact, we have very exciting data showing essentially two things. One, that in convalescent people convalescent from COVID, it is clear that the virus does not induce a permanent scarring of the immune system. So again, the immunome of healthy people and the immunome of COVID, the patients, is essentially intact. So it's very, very different than HIV or other viral diseases. So hopefully this helps with the people like scaring the community. It's not a permanent scaring. There are differences which are typical of somebody who has overcome a viral disease, like the flu. You can really pinpoint this. And then very, very interesting, and we are very, very excited. We pick the little pieces of the virus, which are antigenic, meaning they are seen by the immune system. And we could identify what I call an immune rheostat, a dimmer, which can control the intensity of the immune response. Why is this important? COVID per se doesn't kill anyone. It is an inappropriate immune response which causes inflammation and problems. And we discovered what are the components for this inflammation, but also these patients did not die, they're doing well, right? So the same fragments of the virus are recognized by cells which generate inflammation and protect from the virus, and by cells which down-regulate inflammation, because that inflammation is not needed anymore. So I call it the rheostat, and we are writing the paper. We're writing the paper right now.
Fascinating. So I thought maybe people are thinking, because it's so much on everyone's mind, I thought I'll just go ahead and ask that. So now kind of coming back to UCAN in particular, one question that occurred to me is you had talked about there was training of local both physicians and nurses. How is that done? Is the protocol, where's the training protocol and program developed? Who imparts it? How do you kind of manage that whole aspect? Because especially as your network grows over time, it's going to be many different people in many different locations. So it'll be interesting to know, how that is going to be managed, even both from a curriculum point of view, but an operational point of view.
Precisely. Thank you for this is a very important question. The key word here is consensus. You cannot impose a treatment or an approach. You need to make sure that it is shared. So we didn't pick rheumatic fever and rheumatology by chance. We had abundant standardized operating procedures related to diagnosis and treatment. We had a consensus conference. So we invited the people from those sites which could be involved. We discussed with them and asked for their input and opinion. And then we are distilling from these input and opinions a manual of operating operations and procedures, which will be the same across the network. We are very, very careful about not only getting the standardized medical and scientific procedures, but being respectful of issues which are very important, including language, ethnicity, religious beliefs. This is both in the procedures and in the digital tool, which needs to be crafted in order to be respectful of such a diversity.
So on that note, do you have to tweak it because of, as you're saying, it's not only the clinical aspect, but it's all the cultural and ethnic thing. Do you have to tweak it for each individual site, or do you find that, you can more or less get one version that is then used everywhere?
The answer is hopefully yes, because precisely because of the way the manual will be created, which is consensus in advance. We should be able to overcome a priori, so to prevent local problems. So in theory, I would expect that most of the tools will be approved locally. But of course, there is no mechanism where one single site can bless for everybody else. So we will, of course, have to go individually. Right now, as I mentioned, we are in phase 1, so we are just dealing with Indonesia.
Right. And on the tool, the app, the digital tool that you're developing, I was just curious to know how much of it is, kind of verbal or written, rather, and how much of it is graphic. Just because
being for children, and that's one more reason why we pick the rheumatic diseases, because there are already some apps with visuals and graphs and tools where you can use really the touch screen or click easily because of the children. There may be at least probably 2 different flavors depending on the age of the child. One entirely, visual, the other with. But in any case, we're not planning. And again, the app is in development as well. Things will be tested. It's boring. It's difficult to type. It will never work. So we already have some experience in US and EU on this sort of apps.
Yeah. That would be really interesting to kind of see the development of it, because as we all know, we are getting more and more in line with that. So,
yes, precisely.
So it's not only, the clinical innovations you're doing, but even the kind of, in a sense, technological and manual innovations.
But in fact, this is why I think there is also an interest in general for global health, meaning these sort of approaches could be studied also in terms of impact. This sort of intervention, is it helpful in, for instance, compliance, in following a chronic disease, which is typically remitting relapsing? These sort of things go beyond just the scope of the disease areas which we pick.
Right, exactly. Okay, I'm just seeing as we don't have the audience. I don't think we have any more. So if you don't mind, I'll keep asking you questions, because I always have a lot of questions.
Yes, thank you.
Well, the other part that kind of was very interesting is your approach to, you have a very specific focus on being self-sustaining. You did mention about industry. Then I think at one of the slides, I also saw something about fundraising, maybe from philanthropic donors within the country. What kind of, angles are you taking on that? What are your both maybe, approaches as well as successes?
I think this is, true business development, and whatever resources go into this initiative must be crafted and perceived as investment. So I see 3 possible sources for next step sustainability. One is leveraging industry, because we can provide a high quality network with sufficient high quality number of patients, even for rare diseases. And that is very important for industry. In addition, given the pediatric rule, which is the need to test in children a given drug before NDA is granted, and given also the differences in ethnicity and therefore possible responsiveness to therapy, particularly immunological therapy, having a network which spans across various countries with the same quality is attractive to industry. So that is one aspect. We can sustain the effort by teaming up with industry. Secondly, as I mentioned before, children are a prime target for philanthropy, not just because emotional issues, but because objectively they are quite vulnerable, particularly in underserved places. So I think this resonates with many donors if the initiative is properly depicted for what it should be, an investment. And then finally, there is also the government. Right now, we're not asking for any support locally, because I think we need to demonstrate first that the idea is good and it is impactful. But once we get there, I think we can leverage on support. I contacted also large philanthropic organizations such as the Gates or Wellcome Trust. And again, the answer is come back once you have shown that it works, which is perfectly reasonable.
So yeah, well, best of luck. I'm sure you will be able to show the results. And maybe I have one last question, and maybe just to kind of get you to comment on what was your biggest obstacle, more in terms of a surprise obstacle. So, we always have, when we start a research, you kind of know there are going to be some teething problems. They're going to, like there's some standard kind of bottlenecks that you almost expect. Was there anything unexpected or, kind of unusual or different about this, that you came across?
The discrepancy between the enthusiasm which got really like a wildfire. When we talk about these outside in Singapore, outside of Singapore, etc. And then some bureaucratic hurdles, which are still not overcome in the initial stages of execution. Again, I respect the procedures and processes, and I'm very available of working together towards solutions. But that was unexpected. In fact, the project is delayed because of these reasons.
So that's something, it's very difficult to control for, I know, but we have to live with it and hopefully overcome it by patience and perseverance. Well, I think I finally run out of questions, although I'm sure I will think of something later.
At disposal.
Yeah, and if we don't have any from the audience, I would just kind of end it then with a big thank you. It was really instructive to learn about it. Best of luck with, getting this off the ground. I'm really looking forward to the results. And of course, we are in touch all the time. So,
of course.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you to the audience. And look out for our next month's Friday Global Health Seminar.
Bye-bye. Thank you again.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.